Hello and welcome to Bite My Pi. Believe it or not, the Raspberry Pi is now almost 9 years old. Since its introduction in 2012, this diminutive single board computer has gone through several revisions, each one improving upon the last. And now, in the shape of the Raspberry Pi 4 Model B, we're going to see if it's finally all grown up. Sure, it has gigabit networking and USB 3, not to mention dual band wireless and Bluetooth. But after all these years, can we now actually use it as a desktop PC? In this video we're going to set up a Pi 4 using the fantastic Twister OS and look at the ins and outs of using the latest iteration of Raspberry Pi as a day-to-day computer. So if this sounds of interest to you, stick around. A quick word before we get started. Obviously, great though it is, the little Raspberry Pi won't be replacing your expensive gaming rig anytime soon, nor will you be editing 4K video. But for web browsing, basic office tasks and a spot of casual gaming, the Pi 4 should serve you very well. During the course of this video we'll be looking at multiple aspects of using a computer operating system. Since this will take a bit of time and not every section may be of interest to everyone, I suggest taking a peek in the video description where each section is timestamped so you can easily flick between them. For the first time in the Raspberry Pi's relatively short history, the Pi 4 is the first model to come in different variants, the difference being the amount of RAM on offer. You should be okay with anything other than the 1GB entry model, which as it happens is no longer for sale anyway. If you really want to push the boat out, there's a brand new Raspberry Pi 400, which is basically a tuned up version of the 4GB Pi 4 built into a stylish keyboard. For the purposes of this video, I'll be using the standard 4GB Raspberry Pi 4. Besides the Pi, you're also going to need a monitor or TV, a network cable if you're not using Wi-Fi, and unless you have the Raspberry Pi 400 personal computer kit, you'll also need a HDMI cable, a power supply, a case to pop your Pi in, and a USB keyboard and mouse. You may also want some speakers if there aren't any built into your display. I've left the microSD card until last because while we may still need one, I'm not going to use it for the Raspberry Pi's storage. Instead, I'll be using an external SSD as this will alleviate the Pi's biggest issue, namely the huge bottleneck in speed caused by running the operating system on a microSD card. Okay, with the hardware all sorted, let's get cracking. The first thing we need to do is connect everything together, as in the illustration on screen. At this stage, don't connect any storage, and when you're ready to go, turn everything on. The reason we're powering on the Pi without any storage attached is to look at its bootloader screen. If the bootloader is dated September the 3rd, 2020 or newer, this means your Raspberry Pi is capable of booting from a USB device. It will need to be able to do this in order for us to run the operating system on an external solid-state drive. So if yours is already up to date, you can skip the next section. Otherwise, you need to perform the following steps. I'm going to do the next part on this Windows PC, but the software I'll be using is cross-platform, so will also work on Linux or a Mac. Let's open a web browser, and I'm going to search for Raspberry Pi. It's raspberrypi.org that we want, and then click on software. If we scroll down the page, we're looking for the Raspberry Pi Imager, and I'm going to download the Windows version and save it to my downloads directory. Once that's finished, we can close the web browser, and then I'm going to go and find it in File Explorer. I'll double click the program to begin the installation, and click on Yes to continue, and from there I'm going to click on Install. Okay, with that done, I'll close File Explorer and click Finish to launch the software. And this is the part where we need a microSD card, and that's because we need it to update the Raspberry Pi's bootloader. So if you haven't done so already, connect your microSD card to your computer and then click on Choose OS. If you scroll down, you're looking for Miscellaneous Utility Images, and then we're going to select the Raspberry Pi 4 EEPROM boot recovery. Next, click on Choose SD, and then select your microSD card. To start the process, click on Write. We get a warning that the contents of our microSD card will be erased, so when you're happy to continue, click on Yes. With the process complete, as it tells us, we can now remove the SD card, and then I'm going to click on continue and close the program. Pop the micro SD card in your Raspberry Pi and power it on. The Bootloader EEPROM will be updated to the latest version. When the Pi's activity LED flashes green rapidly and the screen also turns bright green, the process is successfully completed. When yours does this, turn off the Pi and eject the micro SD card. The time has come to go grab the operating system. So back on the Windows PC, I'm going to open a web browser and search for Twister OS. It's this one, twisteros.com. From the home screen, click on Downloads. Twister OS is available for other hardware besides the Pi, but we're going to click on Raspberry Pi 4. From here you could click on Download, but as Twister OS is unsurprisingly becoming more popular, I've found that this link doesn't always work as too many people are downloading it. So instead I'm going to click on Mirror, and then save the operating system to my downloads directory. At 3 GB in size, it's a pretty big download and can take some time. Anyone who's watched this channel before can probably guess what I'm about to say. Yes, that's right, it's coffee time. So I'll pause the video and come back when it's finished downloading. Okay, several coffees later. Now that I've got the Twister OS image file, I'm going to check its integrity. This is never a bad thing to do, especially when using a mirror site to download it, as you want to be sure that the file hasn't been tampered with. And Twister OS provides us with this handy MD5 checksum to ensure that everything is okay. To use that on Windows, I'm going to open a new browser tab and search for Microsoft File Checksum. It's this application we're after, the Microsoft File Checksum Integrity Verifier. Doesn't that title just roll off the tongue? And then I'm going to download that. Once you've got it, you can close that web browser tab, but leave the Twister OS page open. Then if we open File Explorer and go to the Downloads directory, you want to double click on the Windows package, click Yes to accept the license terms, then click on Browse. I'm going to extract the File Checksum application to my Downloads folder and click on OK to do so. Now that that's done, we have a README file if you'd like to take a look. But I'm going to left click in the white space, then hold down the Shift key on my keyboard and right click. This gives us the option to open a PowerShell window here in the Downloads folder, and if I grab hold of the top bar, I can drag that and resize it to the left hand side of the screen. Then I'm going to click on it to put my Downloads folder on the right. Now because PowerShell is open in the Downloads directory, we can type the following command: /fciv. This is the File Checksum Integrity Verifier we just extracted. Space /Twister with a capital T, and then press the Tab key on your keyboard to complete the command. The / simply means that those items are located in the current directory, in this case Downloads. So when I press Enter, this command is going to run a check against the Twister OS image file that I downloaded. Okay, so there's the MD5 checksum, and if I close File Explorer and resize the Twister OS web page, you can check the two checksums against one another, and providing they're both the same, which they are here, that means our download of Twister OS is okay and we're good to go. So let's close both the windows and proceed. Next we're going to copy Twister OS onto our external SSD. To do this we'll be using the Raspberry Pi Imager. You may have it installed from earlier in the video. If not, you can download it from raspberrypi.org/software. To open the program, click on the Start menu and type Raspberry, and then select the Raspberry Pi Imager. Click Yes to proceed, and then we're going to choose the operating system. If you scroll down the list to the bottom, you need to select Use Custom, then browse to where you downloaded the Twister OS image, select it and click on Open. If you haven't already, you need to connect your external SSD to your computer, and then we're going to click on Choose SD card. I'm going to select my 120GB SSD and then click on Write. This process will wipe the existing contents on the SSD, so when you're happy to continue, click Yes. Marvellous, so we can click continue, close the program and unplug our SSD. We're now ready to boot our Raspberry Pi using Twister OS. Make sure that all the peripherals are connected to your Pi, and perhaps most importantly, ensure that your external solid-state drive is connected to one of the Pi's USB 3 ports. They're the blue ones nearest the network adapter. And when you're ready to proceed, turn on the power. On the welcome screen there are links for further help and information. I'm going to click Next to continue. Here it's a good idea to configure your Raspberry Pi, so click on Let's Go to do so. On the System tab we have Password. With Twister OS being based on Raspberry Pi OS, the Pi user account has the same default password of Raspberry, so I'd suggest changing this to something more secure. Just enter your new password and then confirm it. Likewise, we can change the computer's host name. I'm going to go with Byte My Pi. Leave boot on the selected to desktop. As we're setting this up as a desktop PC, you probably don't want it to log in automatically, so set that to disabled for security. We don't want to network boot, and you can leave the splash screen unenabled. Right, next click on the Display tab. Obviously what you set in here will depend on the display you've got your Pi connected to. Hopefully the overscan option will be fine on disabled, but if the edges of your picture are missing you may need to enable this. If you're using a large high definition display you may want to enable pixel doubling, and if you're outputting your video through a HDMI cable you can leave composite video turned off. Next along is the Interfaces tab. Here we have the camera setting. This is for if you plan on using a Raspberry Pi camera module that connects to the camera interface on the Pi. I'm going to leave that turned off. If you wanted to be able to remotely access your Raspberry Pi's terminal, you could enable SSH. Likewise, if you'd like to be able to connect remotely to your Pi's desktop, you could turn on VNC. If you have a need for SPI or Serial Peripheral Interface, you won't need me to tell you that you need to enable it. The same goes for I2C or Inter-Integrated Circuit. In fact, let's jump to the Performance tab because the rest of those options are quite specialised. In here we can set the GPU or Graphics Processing Unit memory. By default it's set to 128 megabytes. As my Pi has 4 gigabytes of RAM, I'm going to bump this up to 512. Bear in mind this graphics memory will be taken out of the RAM, so in my case I'll be down to 3.5 gigabytes. The other thing worth considering in this section is the fan. The Pi 4 does have a tendency to run a bit warm compared to previous models, so a fan could be a worthwhile investment. If you've got the official Raspberry Pi 4 case, there's also an official Raspberry Pi 4 case fan. Not only is this designed to optimally fit the case, but by having 3 connectors it can also be controlled through the Pi's GPIO header. Unfortunately I haven't got my hands on one yet, but if you have, simply enable this setting, leave the fan GPIO on 14, and then you can set the temperature at which you want the fan to kick in, but I'll turn that off for now. Lastly we have the Localization tab. So first I'm going to set my locale, which for me is English and GB United Kingdom. Then I'm going to check the time zone and change that to Europe and London. Next I'm going to set my keyboard, and I need English UK. And lastly in the Raspberry Pi configuration, if you're going to use Wi-Fi to connect to your network, you should set your Wi-Fi country. I'm looking for GB, so let's find that. And there we go, GB Britain UK. And with all of that set, click on OK. I'm not going to reboot just yet, as I want to finish going through Twister OS's setup steps first. So to carry on, let's click on Next. At this point it wants to update the operating system. If you've got a network cable plugged into your Raspberry Pi, you can click on Update now. But if, like me, you're going to use Wi-Fi, we need to connect to that first. Let's click on the network connection icon, and then select your wireless network. Enter your wireless key. and then click on connect. And once you're joined to your wireless network, then you can update your system. And it looks like I'm already up to date, so that's great news. Let's carry on. With all of that done, we're almost ready to go. As it tells us, you can always visit System Settings to set up hardware or change your preferences. The last thing you could do before selecting Get Started is choose your theme, but I'll come to how to do that in a moment because I want to do a reboot first. Okay, let's click Get Started, then go up to the power button at the top right, and from there click on Restart. If you also disabled auto login, you'll need to pop in your password at the login screen. Before we go any further, the Twister OS documentation advises that we also change the root password, which by default is also Raspberry. If you're not familiar with Linux, the root account is like the administrator account in Windows, so it's even more important that we give this a good password. To do so, we're going to open the terminal by clicking on Menu at the top left and selecting Terminal Emulator. Then type sudo -i and press enter. If you look at the prompt, it's changed from pi to root, so we've now got root or admin access to the Linux terminal. And to change the root password, we just need to type PASSWD and press enter. Type in your new password and press enter again. You can use the same password as that of your Pi account if you want. Whatever you choose, just be sure to make a note of it, and then enter it again to confirm. We can leave the root account by typing exit and pressing enter, and then type exit again to close the terminal. Twister OS is full of great features, but possibly one of the best is its ThemeTwister. To launch that, double click on its desktop shortcut, and then click on Next. At the moment we're using the operating system's default Twister OS theme, but the beauty of ThemeTwister is that we can change the appearance at the click of a button. Even better, it can resemble systems we're already familiar with. On the whole, the titles are pretty self-explanatory, so you could reminisce in the glory days of Windows XP with Raspbian XP, or maybe you preferred the look of Windows 7. Perhaps more useful though are Nighthawk, Raspbian X, iRaspbian and iRaspbian Dark, which resemble these more modern operating systems. So choose the one you'd like to use and then click on it. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to go with Raspbian X. As it tells us, the system will restart, so when you're ready to continue, press enter on your keyboard. Welcome to the Windows 10, Twister OS login screen. Can you tell the difference? Click on the account's username, then type in your password to log in. Here we have the Twister OS desktop. Let's have a look around. By right clicking we get a context menu. There's a few useful options in here, like Create Launcher. Let's say I wanted to put a shortcut on my desktop for a text editor. I'll start by typing in what I'm looking for, and it's actually given us the choice of two different text editors. I'm going to go with Mousepad, and as you can see it's filled in the details for me. Then you can click Create to make your shortcut, which despite the name looks a lot like Windows Notepad. If I double click on it, because it's not been run before, I need to mark it as executable. And there we have our note or mousepad. Create URL link on the context menu can be useful. Perhaps there's a website that you often visit. Let's say I like shopping on eBay. If I give it the name eBay, you can enter a comment if you'd like to, and then enter the website's address or URL. Next I'm going to choose an icon for it. I'm going to look in status icons, scroll down and pick a star. Okay, let's create my link. And if I double click on it, then mark it as executable, that's it, I can get to my online shopping even easier. Back on the context menu, we have the facility to arrange the desktop icons if things have become a bit unruly. The last thing on the context menu I'd like to look at is the desktop settings. You can go in here if you fancy a change of background. So if you wanted a touch of nostalgia, you could select this one. But as I've already spent far too much of my life staring at that, I'm going to change it to the Northern Lights. If you'd prefer something a little less static, in the Start menu's Settings category we have Dynamic Wallpaper. If you were to enable this and then pick one of the options, after clicking Save and Close, the wallpaper will go from lighter to darker throughout the course of the day. Right, along the bottom of the screen we have a taskbar, over on the left hand side of which we have Twister OS's Start menu. There's a whole raft of software pre-installed, some of which we'll take a look at in this video. The programs are divided into categories to make them easier to find, or if you know what you're looking for you can type its name in the search box. At the bottom of the Start menu we have a link to Settings, which even includes a handy link to online documentation. So if you're into that sort of thing you can go and read the manual. Back in the Start menu next to Settings we have the lock screen, so you could trigger this if you needed to step away from your computer for a minute. Next to that is Switch Users for if you set up more than one user on your Pi, and then we have Shut Down and Log Out. Clicking Log Out actually reveals other options as well. If you right click on one of the installed programs, you can easily add it to a more accessible location. This could be Favourites, Desktop, or even the taskbar or panel at the bottom of the screen. Finally, in the Start menu, if you click on your Pi account, you can personalise your details and even include a mugshot. Next to the Start menu we have what looks like Cortana, but is actually Catfish File Search. Let's first update the database and unlock it as it requires admin rights. So you'll need to enter your Pi account's password to do so. And when it's updated you can click on Close. Having only just installed the operating system, I haven't really got any files on here yet, but I did create that eBay shortcut on my desktop which is technically a file, so let's just search for that as an example. If I type in eBay and press enter, you can see that not only has it found the file, it also tells us its size and where it's located, in this case on the desktop. Obviously this ability to search will be far more useful as you add more files to the system. Next along from the Catfish File Search is a shortcut to the File Manager, and next to that we have Add Remove Software. We'll come back to this in the installing software section of the video. We have a shortcut to the web browser. Although the icon looks like Chrome, it's actually the Chromium open source version. I like to set my home page to Google, but you can use whatever you like. I'm going to agree to the terms and then go to Settings on the drop down list. From there, by going to the Appearance section, I can turn on the Home button and set my home page to Google by copying and pasting the address from the other tab, and then press enter to save it. In the Startup section, I'm also going to remove the Twister OS entry, click on Open a specific page, and then select Use Current Pages. So then if I close the browser, every time I open it, it should go to Google's search page. And if I've been browsing the web, I can click the Home button to go back to Google as well. Believe it or not, other search engines are available. Back on the taskbar we've got what would appear to be some Office shortcuts. The Mail one would launch the Evolution email client. Personally I prefer Thunderbird and I'll be showing you how to set that up later. Then we have what would appear to be Word and Excel. We'll take a look at these in the Office section of this video. After that is a shortcut to the terminal, and then we have the mousepad text editor. Over on the right hand side of the taskbar we have On Demand, which I'll talk about when we get to the Pi's power stroke performance settings. Next to that we have Bluetooth if you have a need for it, then a power icon, Wi-Fi and sound, and lastly we have a calendar and notifications. Although Twister OS is populated with plenty of programs, there may come a time when you want to add more, and since there's no time like the present, to do that we'll open Add Remove Software. You can browse a category, for example games, or if you know what you're after you can type in the search box. I like the Super Tux kart racing game, so let's have a look for that. At the bottom you get a description of the highlighted entry. So to install it, tick the box and click apply. Then pop in your password when it asks you for it. That's going to take a little while, so I'll pause the video and come back when it's finished installing. Okay, that's now installed. We'll take a look at the game a little later, but next I'm going to install the Thunderbird email application. And there it is, highlighted. So I'll tick the box and click apply. And pop in my password to allow it to install. We can also uninstall software from within Add Remove Software. Now that I've got Thunderbird, I'm not going to need the Evolution mail program. So if I do a search for that, I'm going to untick the Evolution Groupware Suite highlighted entry and click apply. The beauty of using a software center like Add Remove Software is that it takes care of any dependencies. This is additional software that the main program needs to run. Likewise, it also takes care of these when we remove a package. So as you can see on the screen, as well as the Evolution program itself, it's also going to remove this additional software that's no longer required. So let's click continue to proceed, then type in our password to execute the removal. I'm also going to remove the independent files for Evolution, as they're no longer needed. Don't remove any Evolution data server packages, as these are required elsewhere. In fact, it's always best to err on the side of caution. Basically, if you're not sure what something does, it won't hurt to leave it installed. Right, so let's click on apply and select continue to remove that software. Once you've finished in Add Remove Software, you can click on OK to close it. Also, when it comes to software, in the Start menu's Accessory section, we have Pi Apps. The Pi Apps developer calls this the Raspberry Pi App Store for open source projects. This is basically a collection of install scripts for useful apps, which are easily executed with a couple of clicks of the mouse, not least of which is Arduino for getting your electronics fix, Cura for preparing that 3D print, and FreeCAD for a spot of 3D modelling. So simply select an app and click on install. So there we have it, Cura is now installed, and if we close Pi Apps, we can find it in the graphics section of the Start menu. I never thought I'd be opening that on a Raspberry Pi. Before moving on from the software section, there's one other part that's worth being aware of, and it's back in the Start menu, Accessories, right under Pi Apps, this time called PiKit. It looks like it's updated itself, so we need to open it again. That's more like it. So this is yet another way to install more software. At this rate we'll be needing a bigger hard drive. There's multiple entries listed, everything from tweaks to games to multimedia and even server content. So have a browse around. In info there's a handy utility for testing your internet bandwidth. So this uses speedtest.net to perform the checks. And when it's finished it shows you your download speed and your upload speed. And you can press enter to come out of there. When you've finished in PiKit you can select exit. Twister OS will usually inform you when there's an update available, as is the case here. So click on Details to have a look. You can view the changelog to see what the update includes, or just click Install to proceed. And once it's finished you can do a restart. If you ever want to manually check for an update, click on the Start menu, go to System and scroll down to the Twister OS Patcher. And as you can see, unsurprisingly, we're now up to date. When it comes to power settings on the Pi, Remember that compared to a standard desktop PC, the Raspberry Pi is already extremely power efficient. That said, there are still things you can do to save even more juice. Let's start by launching Settings and then opening Power Manager. The General tab isn't much use to us, not least of which because unless you've wired one in, the Raspberry Pi doesn't have a physical power button. Likewise, the Pi doesn't support Suspend or Hibernate, so the System tab doesn't really help either. But over on the Display tab, you can set timers to cut off the video signal to your display. If you're going to do this, you might want to turn on some security too. At the opposite end of power saving, we have Performance. And since we're setting our Raspberry Pi up as a desktop PC, you may want to pump every available watt of power through the processor to speed things along. If that's the case, take a look at Commander Pi. Specifically, you'll want to take a trip to the overclock section. It's advisable to heed the warning. By default, the Pi 4's processor will clock up to 1.5 GHz. But looking at this utility's recommended values, you can see we could take this up to 2 GHz. It's easily done. You just enter the value you want in each box and then click on Set. And when you've entered the values you want to try, you select Apply and Reboot. You can even force the Pi to use its turbo mode so that it'll run at the higher clock speed all the time. Obviously, if you want to revert to the Pi's original values, just click the Set to Default and Reboot button. As I don't have any cooling on my Pi, I'm going to come out of there. A useful component when it comes to power saving versus performance is the CPU governor. This controls the frequency or speed of the CPU, and Twister OS has a great feature that allows us to change this. If we return to the taskbar where it says On Demand, this actually shows us some CPU information about the Raspberry Pi's quad-core processor. As we can see, the governors are currently set to On Demand. As the name suggests, this setting means that the CPU will speed up and slow down as it's needed. But if I close that and go to the Start menu and then head into System, you can change this as required. So we also have Performance and Power Save. Whereas On Demand is like a balanced mode, Performance will tell the CPU to run at its highest speed, whereas Power Save will use its lowest frequency. Let's change the governor to Performance for a moment. Notice this is reflected in the taskbar, and if we look at the available frequencies, they're now all set at max. The Twister OS documentation recommends using this performance setting when you're gaming, but for now I'm going to return to On Demand. Let's now look at carrying out office tasks using Twister OS. On the taskbar, if we click what looks like Microsoft Word, you'll see it launches LibreOffice Writer. Alternatively, if we click what would appear to be Excel, we get LibreOffice Calc. If you're not familiar with LibreOffice, as the name suggests, this is a free office suite. Better yet, it's actually compatible with Microsoft Office. By default, it will actually save files in open rather than proprietary formats. But I'm going to show you how to change this, as a large part of the world still uses Microsoft Office. So if we close Calc and go to the Start menu, in the Office category we're looking for LibreOffice. So you can see that this Office suite contains numerous applications. If we click on Tools and select Options, and then click on the little arrow to expand Load Stroke Save, we actually want the General section. And I'm going to change the default file formats that LibreOffice uses to save files. First, I'm going to uncheck this box, as I don't want it warning me every time I use a Microsoft file format. On the text document type, I'm going to save those as Word 2007 to 2019 docx files. If I then select Spreadsheet, I'm going to save these as Excel 2007 to 2019 Excel SX files. And then if I select Presentation, I'm going to save these documents as PowerPoint 2007 to 2019 PPTX files. And with that done, I can click OK. So now if I was to create a document, when I save it, let's just call it Test, and I'll keep it in my Documents folder. and click Save. You can see that it saved it as test.docx, which is a Microsoft Word document. If I close the program and open File Manager, then browse to Document, there it is. So now you can carry out your office tasks on your Raspberry Pi. When it comes to email, obviously you can carry on using webmail through your browser, but for those who prefer an email client, remember I installed Mozilla's Thunderbird in the software section of this video. So let's first remove the Evolution Mail shortcut, as I uninstalled that earlier, and then we're going to find Thunderbird. So I'll type it into the search box, then right click on the program and add to panel. Now I don't want it all on its own over here on the right hand side, so I'm going to right click on it and select move, and then move it over to where the mail shortcut was before, and left click to position it. Right, let's open it up. The setup wizard's a bit big for my small screen, and unfortunately you can't resize it. If you have this problem, go to the Start menu and open Settings, click on Display, and then set it to a higher resolution. Don't worry, you can change it back when you're done, and then select Apply. I'm going to leave the display window open as I'll change it back in a moment. Right, so now you can fill in your details on the Thunderbird setup wizard. Thunderbird is very good at detecting email providers automatically. So if you enter your name, pop in your email address, enter your password, and then click Continue. When the settings appear, make sure that IMAP's selected and that it's using SSL. If Thunderbird doesn't find your email provider or you're having any problems, you can configure it manually. And when you're happy to continue, click Done. If it's a Google account, you'll have to authenticate it in the browser as well. And then you have to give Thunderbird permission to access your email account. Depending on how many emails you've got, it may take Thunderbird a little while to retrieve them. But now we have working email. I'm going to close Thunderbird and readjust the resolution. And then we can close the display settings. Next we're going to set up printing on the Pi. I've connected a USB cable to my printer, and I've got this missing printer driver message popped up on screen. Even if you intend to connect to your printer wirelessly, I'd still suggest attaching a USB cable to start with, as this can help you sort out any driver issues first before adding the additional complexity of wireless networking. So the first thing I'm going to do is click on Search, and hopefully it'll find a driver. If so, make sure it's selected and then click on Forward. If you've got a bypass tray or any additional trays connected to your printer, you can select them here and then click on Forward. You can set a name for your printer. As I only have the one, I'm just going to call it Printer. I'll leave the description with its model name, and I'm not going to bother entering a location. And then I'll click on Apply. Right, if I open the settings and then go into Print Settings, there's my added printer. I'm going to right click on that and choose Properties, and then I'm going to click on Print Test Page. That was nice and easy, and I've got my first print. Let's close out of that. If that wasn't the case for you, don't despair, because there's other things we can try. If you open the web browser and in the address bar type localhost:631 and press enter. This will load what's known as the CUPS web interface, which is a powerful printing system that will hopefully help us out. If I go to the Printers tab, you can see it's got my printer. Let's pretend it wasn't working, so if I click on that, go to the Administration drop down list and select Delete Printer, then confirm that that's what I want to do. You'll need to enter your Pi's username and your password, and then sign in. Let's return to the Printers tab. So now that I've got no printer, I'm going to add it this time using CUPS. Let's go to the Administration tab. This time, as well as going through what to do if your printer driver doesn't work, I'm also going to show you how to add the printer wirelessly. If you're ready to add your wireless printer, unplug the USB cable and make sure it's connected to your Wi-Fi. To proceed, click on Add Printer, and so long as your printer's connected to your wireless network, you should see it next to Discovered Network Printers. So I'm going to select mine and then click Continue. Again, I'm just going to give it the name Printer, and I'll leave the description as is, and then I'm going to click Continue. You can see that this time it's found a whole range of printers that are made by Ricoh. If this wasn't right, you could select another make. You want to scroll down the list until you find your model. This one will do for me. If there are no suitable drivers in the list, you'll need to visit the support section of your printer manufacturer's website and look for what's called a PPD file, and then you can manually upload this. Okay, next we need to click on Add Printer. There's a few options you can set if you'd like to. I'm going to keep with the defaults. And then if I click on the printer's name, that's it. Once again my printer's installed, and this time it's wireless. I'm going to go up to the maintenance drop down list and choose Print Test Page. And there we have another successful print. More usefully, now that the printer's installed, I could open the word processor or any other program that allows you to print and send a document to the printer. There's no point printing a blank page, but you can see that the printer is listed. And that's how we print from our Raspberry Pi. In this section of the video we're going to look at accessing a network share. It doesn't matter whether you're running a server or network attached storage device, just so long as we're connecting to an SMB or CIFS network share, which is probably the most widely used type. Okay, so to do this, let's open the file manager and click on Browse Network. You can see I've got an Open Media Vault box containing that kind of share. Don't panic if yours hasn't been automatically detected, as we'll look at how to manually connect to it in a moment. But if it has shown up, just double click on it and you should see a list of your network shares. I've just got the one originally named share, and if you double click on it you should see this dialog box. So I'm going to select Registered User, enter the username of my Open Media Vault NAS account. If you have a domain name you can enter it here, otherwise leave it on Workgroup, and then enter the password to connect to your network share. You'll probably want it to remember that forever, but as I'm going to demonstrate how to manually connect to your share in a moment, I'll leave it on Remember Password until you log out. And then you can click on Connect. And just like that, I now have access to the folders on my network drive. Okay, I'm going to close that, and I'll log out and log back in before going through the manual setup. Right, so we're going to open File Manager once more, and this time instead of clicking on Browse Network, we're going to click on the Go drop down menu and go to Open Location, and then in the top bar we're going to type the following: SMB : followed by the IP address of your server or NAS, then another / and the name of your network share, which in my case is simply share, and then press enter on your keyboard and you should get the same dialog box we saw before. As my network share requires authentication, I'm going to select Registered User, pop in the username and password for my NAS account, and this time I'm going to remember that forever, and then click on Connect. Now you can see I've got the share listed beneath Network, but to make a more permanent link I'm going to right click on that and create a shortcut. So it's now listed in my Places, but if I right click on that and rename the shortcut, I can give it a more meaningful name and then press enter to change it. Great, so now when I open the file manager I've got that handy link on the left hand side to my share, and depending on the share's permissions you should be able to make a new folder. So not only can I access the documents stored on my network drive, I can also put new ones on there as well. Another nice program that comes pre-installed on Twister OS is My Android. This allows you to mirror your Android device's display on the Twister OS desktop. As you can imagine, this could have numerous uses, not least of which could be viewing and responding to text messages if you connect into your smartphone. That's right, My Android doesn't just allow you to view the display of your Android device, it allows you to interact with it as well. You can see that this uses SCRCPY or screen copy to do the heavy lifting. So without further ado, let's get it up and running. We're going to start on the Android device. For this walkthrough I'm using a little Android tablet, but My Android would probably be more useful with your smartphone. The setup procedure is basically the same whether you connect a phone or a tablet. So let's swipe up from the bottom of the screen and head into Settings. I'm going to go down to System and then into About Phone, and then I need to find the build number. The layout between Android models can vary, but just have a look around until you find it. You need to tap on the build number 7 times. As you can see, I've already done this as it turns on developer options. You may be asked to authenticate, for example using your PIN to do so. Once developer options is enabled, you need to go back into System and find it. Enter into the developer options and make sure that USB debugging is turned on. Again, I've already done this. Okay, we can come out of Settings and return to the Raspberry Pi. Next we need to connect a USB cable from the Android device to the Pi. This will either be a micro USB to USB Type A or a USB-C to USB Type A cable, depending on the age of your Android device. With that done, we need to double click on My Android. When the Allow USB Debugging prompt appears on your smartphone or tablet, check the box to always allow from this computer and then click on OK. Back in Twister OS, double click on My Android again, and all being well you should be looking at your Android display on your Raspberry Pi. If I rotate the tablet into portrait mode, you can see that the mirrored display changes too, so it could be handy to drag this to the side of your desktop display and leave it open there. Even though this is a tablet, I've put phone and text apps at the bottom of the screen, so you can hopefully see how this might be useful with your smartphone. If a phone call came through, you'd be able to see who's calling and even answer the call, but you'd still need to speak into the handset to actually talk to the caller. With a text, on the other hand, not only could you read the message, but you could also enter a reply. You can even use your keyboard to type in the text, although you can also click the letters of the on-screen keyboard if you prefer. And there you have the My Android software. Just click the cross to close it, and then disconnect the USB cable from your device. In the current climate, one piece of software seems to have come to the fore more than any other, so much so that it's even being used as a verb. Of course, I'm talking about Zoom. So let's have a look at how to get that up and running on our Pi. First, we need the necessary hardware to allow us to make video calls. To do this, I've connected a USB microphone and webcam to the Pi. If you're following along, you'll also need to hook up a USB hub, as there's now 5 USB devices and only 4 USB ports on the Pi. Though not required, it's not a bad idea to test your webcam before trying to use it with Zoom. If you want to do this, open the terminal, and we're going to install a little program called Cheese. So when you've typed in the on-screen command, press enter on your keyboard. With that installed, we can find it on the Start menu in the Multimedia category, and there it is, Cheese. Once you know that your webcam's working, you can close the program. And now let's install Zoom. From the Start menu, head into Accessories. We're looking for Pi Kit. If you've been watching the entire video, you may recall that we looked at this program earlier in the software section. This time though, we're going to use the cursor keys on the keyboard to go to Internet and press enter to select it. And would you look at that, here we have Zoom. So once it's highlighted, I'm going to press enter again. And it looks like it's been installed. As it tells us, let's press enter to run. Okay, let's try signing in. Obviously you need a Zoom account to do this, but if you don't already have one, you can click on here to sign up for free. I'm going to click sign in and then click on continue. You can minimize the terminal out of the way, just don't close it or you'll close the program. It appears there's a new version of Zoom available, but behind the scenes there's some emulation magic happening just to get Zoom running on the Raspberry Pi in the first place. And PiKiss will have installed the most recent working version, so it's best just to close that. To start, I'm going to click on New Meeting and then select Join with Computer Audio. Going down to the bottom bar, we need to click on Start Video. If you don't see your webcam feed, make sure that the correct camera is selected in the list. With that up and running, select Participants from the bottom of the screen and then click on Invite. I'm going to send an email invitation and click on Copy Invitation. If you wanted to be more secure, you could just copy the invite link and then text or ring the person up with the meeting passcode. Next, you need to paste either the link or invitation into an email and send it to the recipient who you want to have the Zoom meeting with. I've just done that and I'm now accessing the email on my Android tablet. So if the person you're sending it to first installs Zoom onto their device and then selects the Join Zoom Meeting link in the email and Open with Zoom, always. They can type in their name and tap on OK, then agree to the terms of service. Accept any permissions that are required, such as recording audio, then turn on the audio by selecting Join Audio and Call over Internet. After that, select Start Video and allow Zoom to record video. If we return to the Raspberry Pi and close the invite window, as well as the participants box, then we can maximize the meeting window. And there we have a live Zoom meeting, complete with the boss dropping in. And when the meeting's finished, you can click on Leave and then Leave Meeting. Okay, I'm going to close out of Zoom. Don't forget to also close that terminal window that we minimized earlier. Next time you want to open Zoom, you can find it in the Internet section of the Start menu. So now, even on the Raspberry Pi, there's no escape from work. If you dive into the Internet section of the Start menu, you'll see that we have Twister OS web apps. As the name suggests, these are Internet applications, and therefore run inside the web browser. But as you can see, they're made easily accessible and even grouped into categories. So let's say I fancied a spot of YouTube browsing. I could head for the multimedia section and then click on YouTube. If I close the web apps page and then maximize the window, you even get the little YouTube logo in the taskbar. Notice you don't get the usual website address bar. That's because the web app already knows the platform it needs to run, in this case YouTube. If you're wondering what a web app actually is, it's an application that runs on a web server. Therefore you don't need to install it on your computer, but you do need an internet connection in order to use it. If you plan on using these web apps a lot, it could certainly be worthwhile to add the launcher to the panel. If you're a keen photographer or just like working with images, be sure to take a look at PhotoGIMP. Usually just called GIMP or the GNU Image Manipulation Program, here this brilliant software has been patched to more closely resemble Photoshop. So whether you're curious about curves, want to load up with layers, or just get plain funky with filters, PhotoGIMP should fit the bill. Next we're going to look at entertainment, both audio and video. Twister OS includes the Chromium Media Edition. While this isn't recommended for your day-to-day browsing, you have the standard version of Chromium for that. Chromium Media Edition will allow you to play your DRM content, so this means you'll be able to watch the likes of Netflix. Here we are in Amazon's Prime Video, watching the Lego Movie, which I've paused for copyright reasons. If we go to the Start menu to the Multimedia section, you can see we've got a range of media players built in, including the excellent Kodi. I won't go into the ins and outs of how this works, as that could take up an entire video by itself, but it's great that it's pre-installed in Twister OS. Returning to the multimedia section, we also have VLC Media Player. This will play practically any kind of media file you care to throw at it. If you're looking specifically at the audio side of things, you could take a look at Audacious. This reminds me a lot of Winamp that came out for Windows back in the 1990s. I'm not overly keen on this tiny little interface, but if you click on the drop down menu at the top left, then go to View and select Visualizations. From here, if you click on Appearance and look at Interface, in fact it actually calls it Winamp Classic Interface, you can change this to GTK Interface instead. Let's close that out of the way. That looks a bit more user friendly. So let's add a track. You can either open files or add files. Open files is easier if all of your tracks are stored in the same location, but add files allows you to pick and choose from different directories. I grabbed a couple of tracks from YouTube Audio, so let's select that one and add it from my music directory, and then if I browse to my home folder, I'm going to add the other one from there, and then I can close add files. You can see that it automatically puts them into a new playlist, and if I want to, I can give that another name. Let's try playing one. So you can see we've got the standard buttons along the top, as well as a repeat and shuffle and a volume slider. Let's stop that. There's drop down menus along the top, and we can create more playlists from here. Your settings are automatically saved, so you don't have to worry when you close the program. Having a desktop PC wouldn't be much fun if it was all work and no play. So the last area I want to touch on is gaming. There are a couple of recommendations for getting the best out of Twister OS when it comes to playing your games. First, if you're using a widescreen display, you could lower the resolution to 1280 by 720. Mine's already set to this because of the small monitor that it's connected to. And second, you could change the CPU governor to performance mode instead of on demand. We looked at how to do this earlier in the Pi Power Settings section of this video. You could just try running the game you want to play and then make any adjustments if necessary. If I click the Start menu and look in Games, you may recall that I installed SuperTux Kart earlier. Let's right click and pop a shortcut on the desktop. Now let's have a look at that game. We get this message that the OpenGL version appears to be too old. Without getting into the ins and outs of the hardware, this is basically because the game is using desktop graphics on what to all intents and purposes is a mobile chip. Doing this on the Raspberry Pi allows for OpenGL 2.1 support, whereas ideally SuperTux Kart wants OpenGL 3.1. So let's click OK and see what happens. Here you can choose if you want to connect to an online server to download add-ons and notify you of updates. I'm not going to do that. Then you can create your user for the game and click on OK to start. Let's launch into single player, and I'll go with Tux. I'll leave it on Novice and select Normal Race. Choose a track and then click Start Race. If you're using a keyboard, it's the cursor keys for forwards, backwards, left and right. You can use the escape key to exit the race. So that seems to run okay. Let's come out of that and close the game. Now we couldn't very well talk about gaming on the Raspberry Pi without mentioning RetroPie. If you're not familiar with this, it's a platform for playing all those golden oldies from back in the day. If the software doesn't load and instead you get this password prompt, don't worry, it just means you turned off auto login on your Raspberry Pi account. Just press enter on your keyboard to proceed, and then log in with your Raspberry Pi account's username and password. Once you're logged into the terminal, hold down the Ctrl, Alt and F7 keys on your keyboard. This will return you to the Twister OS desktop, and then you can double click RetroPie again. I've already connected an old USB gamepad, and as you can see RetroPie has detected it. So to configure the controls you need to hold down a button on the gamepad, and then you can work your way down the list, pressing the relevant buttons on your gamepad to configure them. If there are any you don't want to or can't configure, Say for example if, like mine, your gamepad doesn't have enough physical buttons to configure all these options, you can hold down any button on your controller to skip one. But you must enable the hotkey, as when used in combination with the start button this allows you to exit out of games. When you reach OK at the bottom, tap the A button on your controller to continue. If you ever need to configure RetroPie, you can use your gamepad to move along the main bar and then press the A button to enter the configuration menu, and the B button will back out of there. As you can see, there's not a lot in here at the moment. That's because you need to supply RetroPie with your own gaming ROMs. Right, let's go grab one. First we need to exit out of RetroPie. You can do that by pressing the start button to bring up the menu, navigating down to quit, and then quit emulation station. Let's open the web browser and visit a site that provides free gaming ROMs. Note these are all perfectly legal for personal use. That's because they've been generously made available by some of the original creators. So the website is mamedev.org/ROMs. Right, let's have a look what there is. I'm going to select Supertank. Scrolling down the page you can see that this was an arcade game. So let's scroll back up to the download link. We need to tick the box and then download the game. Once it's finished downloading, head over to File Manager's Downloads directory. Next we need to copy the downloaded file, go to our account's home directory and locate the RetroPie folder. Then paste the downloaded game into the ROM's arcade folder. With that done, we can relaunch RetroPie. You can see we've now got this new arcade section, and if I press the A button on my gamepad, there's the Supertank game that I just downloaded. So let's give it a whirl. It looks as though there's a choice of emulators. Since I downloaded Supertank from the MameDev website, I'm going to use my keyboard to select the LR-MAME 2003 emulator to run it. Get an eye full of those graphics. They certainly don't make them like this anymore. Okay, let's come out of that. And that's the basics of RetroPie. Another gaming option is provided to us by this desktop shortcut for Lutris. This is an open source gaming platform for Linux. It's already picked up some of the games that come preloaded in Twister OS, which you can also find in the games section of the start menu. If a game's already installed on your Raspberry Pi, you can easily import it into Lutris. To do so, click on the plus at the top left and choose Import Games. In a moment I'll select SuperTux Kart, but be aware you can also connect Lutris to other platforms like GOG and Humble Bundle. Okay, so let's import SuperTux Kart. With that selected, I'm going to click Import Games, and if I close the little window, you can see that I've now got SuperTux Kart in here as well. To play a title, just select it and then head over to the options on the right hand side. Note that as well as the big play button, there are other things that you can do from here too, such as creating a desktop shortcut. But when you're ready to dive on in, just click play. And here we have the Pi edition of Minecraft, with its infamous blocky graphics and square-shaped trees. Just tap the escape key to exit out of there, and then we can quit and close the game. You also have the facility to add new games to the platform. As well as supporting native games, Lutris uses programs it aptly refers to as runners to help run games from other platforms. If you'd like to learn more about the software, head over to the website at the address shown below. Just remember this is running on a Raspberry Pi, not a top-flight gaming rig, so temper your expectations accordingly. Also on the desktop we have a link to the Steam client. The first time I ran this it took about 5 minutes to download, install and update, so you may want to pop the kettle on. If you don't already know, Steam is a video game digital distribution service run by Valve. Basically it's a gaming platform for PC gamers. I've never actually used it on the Raspberry Pi, but according to reports it offers limited functionality. When you stop and think about it, it's pretty incredible that it runs at all. Before we finish in the gaming section, don't forget that you've also got the gaming category in the Twister OS web apps. which even includes Tomb Raider. And what could be better than going full screen with Lara? And that almost brings us to the end of this video. The Raspberry Pi has always had its uses, but in the shape of the Pi 4 you can see just how versatile it now is, even filling in as a desktop PC. Sure, some things are slower than you might like, but one of the great things about Linux is choice. If you're not happy with a particular piece of software, you can always find another, perhaps more lightweight alternative. Overall though, I've been very impressed with how well the Pi performed, particularly being hooked up to an external SSD, and Twister OS has proved to be a perfect match for the Pi. I hope you get plenty of use out of it too. As always, if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and if you'd like to be notified when I post the next one, just click the bell icon. Thanks for watching, and until next time, take care.